All right, Rachel Blank, welcome to the Not So Stupid podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Thank you for coming on the show. I'm really excited to have you on and talk about what we're going to talk about in a little bit. But first, before we get into that, would you like to share your story about how you got to where you are for the people that might not be aware of what you do?
Yeah, I'm Rachel Blank. I'm the founder and CEO of Alara, which is a specialty care platform for women with chronic conditions. I really built Alara a lot out of my own personal experience. I was diagnosed with a condition called polycystic ovary syndrome about 10 years ago. And even though it's a very common condition that affects about 1 in 10 women, I had never really had any great medical care around it. I never really feel like I knew where to go, where to get support, and found myself just really frustrated with my healthcare journey. Have a background in business. I went to business school. I worked for a digital healthcare startup, and realized that I could use all of those things I had learned both at school and in my professional experience to build something better for women like myself. And so that was how I ended up building Alara. Was really, it was the care platform that I was looking for, and decided to make it not only for myself but for other women like me.
Nice. That's actually a really uh, generous story in a way, right? You don't want other women to suffer the same way you kind of suffered going through it. What were your biggest hardships early on that you're looking to help women not see right now as they go through a similar journey as you?
Yeah, I think the unfortunate thing about our healthcare system is it's just really not built for chronic conditions. Whether that's in the GI world or in the women's health world, traditional healthcare tends to be very episodic. So we're seeing doctors, once a year for a checkup, or we're seeing them as a reaction, one off if something goes wrong. But we're not really seeing this on this kind of ongoing preventative basis all that often. And doctors also tend to be very siloed. So, they're not speaking to each other. They're not speaking to practitioners like nutritionists when they're thinking about your care. The dermatologist is just thinking about it from the dermatology angle, and the GYN is just thinking about it from the GYN angle. And so when you do have a condition that affects a lot of aspects of your life, how do you get that care coordinated without having this huge burden that you're taking on yourself? So a lot of it is just, when you do have a chronic condition, it can be very much a burden on you as the patient to do your own research, to advocate with your doctors, to track your data around and bring it with you. And that can be really frustrating. And then, later on, women's health. A lot of women really have subpar experiences in healthcare. They feel dismissed, they feel judged. It's crazy, but it was only, 20 years ago that women were required to start being included in medical studies. So really, traditionally, we haven't done a good job of including women in, bringing forward medicine and healthcare. And so, I was seeing all of that firsthand. I would go to doctors and they would say things like, well, you're not trying to get pregnant right now, so I don't know what to do for you. Or I would be like kind of personally trying to look at research articles and see what I should be eating and see what I should be doing. And it just was kind of exhausting. And so what we're doing is really taking on all that burden for you. So we have a care team of providers who can help manage your care. They also collaborate with each other on your care. And we ultimately just want to be a resource so that we can do the work. And it's less of a burden on you.
That's actually really amazing. And there's a lot of great points you made there about the current state of the healthcare system that, is really unfortunate, especially for women to experience. I know working with women myself in nutrition coaching, um, a lot of doctors, even when the doctors are female too, can be very dismissive of what you're feeling and what you're doing, and don't try too hard to get deeper into understanding what's happening with you. And it kind of goes more along the siloed approach that you mentioned. Can you dive deeper about what you mean with the siloed approach so that other people can kind of understand the angle you're taking with that?
Yeah. I think there's a saying in medicine, like look for horses, not zebras. Or in other words, they're kind of trained to figure out like what is the most pressing issue and what is most likely to be the most common issue. So again, for example, when a gynecologist sees me and I say I'm not trying to get pregnant right now, right? Like their instinct is, well, my job is to help figure out how to keep you gynecologically healthy today. It's not about in 5 years from now, you want to get pregnant. So let's start thinking about how we counsel you to be in a good position in 5 years from now. Like that's just not how medicine works. It's about what is the pressing issue today, which again can lead to much more unfortunate outcomes when you have these long-term chronic conditions. I think the other thing to think about is that it's not necessarily that doctors don't want to help these patients. My dad is actually a gynecologist and is a beloved gynecologist in the DC area. And so I've seen firsthand that, there are incredible doctors out there. I think the issue is, again, when we think about the way in which they practice medicine, they're seeing 10 patients every 2 hours, right? They're like getting patients in and out. They have 10-minute visits, and they just don't have time to dive in to the in-depth care needs. They don't have time to do more of a consultative, counseling visit where they're getting to the root cause or really explaining to you the needs around why you should be on this medication versus that medication. It's just not really a format that works for that type of visit. And so part of it is also just, having a different format where we can speak with you on video via telemedicine versus that traditional office format when you have so limited time, actually can allow doctors to practice in a way that they want to practice. I don't want to imply that, all doctors are just dismissive because they don't care. I think a lot of times it's because they just truly don't have time in that office visit, and they're too busy, doing your STD panel and making sure you don't have breast cancer and doing your pap smear to really get into the nitty gritty of these more complex diseases.
No, I love that you pointed that out, because it's like, I think when we look at alternative medicine or a more holistic approach of things, there is like a subtle jab at doctors and like how bad they do things, but it's not necessarily that the doctors are doing things bad. It's the system in which they are working through. One of my good friends, he's in medical school right now, and he was telling me in his practice, they actually time how long you spend with a patient. And if you spend too long, you'll get docked points, because you need to be like really efficient, get from patient to patient, like have it done so that you can see more people, because at the end of the day, hospitals are another form of business, and that's what they're trying to kind of work around.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really what we thought about is, how do we fix, not so much like at the end of the day, like we are employing traditional doctors, but how do we fix the structure in which they're practicing to make things better for both the patient and for the doctor, is something we've thought a lot about.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. You're basically being collaborative with the doctor. You're not replacing a doctor in any way, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Nice. So now what when you look at a holistic approach to working with chronic diseases, like you mentioned, like PCOS or things similar to that, what lifestyle factors or other things do you take into consideration to help each individual person?
Yeah. And so that is also, one of the biggest things we thought through, like, again, to come back to this idea of medicine being siloed. A lot of times it's just, traditional Western medicine, and that's kind of all that you get. When in reality, for these patients, incorporating lifestyle and nutrition components, as well as some Eastern medicine components and supplements, can actually be really valuable. So for example, in the case of women with PCOS, many of them tend to be insulin resistant, which also means that it's very hard for them to lose weight. So we see as a result that about 75% of women with PCOS tend to be overweight or obese. Now, if we're just treating that patient just with medication, like we're just giving them medication that helps the insulin resistance, they probably won't be successful, because if you're not changing your diet, but you're just changing the underlying hormones, like the weight's not going to fall off. Similarly, if all we're doing is changing their diet and we aren't addressing the underlying hormones and we're not helping them with medication, they also might, be really unsuccessful in losing weight and having outcomes that they're looking for. And so by looking at this more holistic model where, it is about the traditional medication, where we are giving you things like metformin, but we're also including the lifestyle and nutrition components, that's where we really can set you up for success, is because we're really giving you all of the tools that you need to succeed, as opposed to just half of the piece of the puzzle. The other thing we think a lot about with nutrition and lifestyle is in these patients, is that, frankly, something that's always really frustrated me is that there are a lot of unlicensed people on the internet telling women with chronic disease what they should do and what they should eat. And oftentimes that looks like very restrictive diets. It might be, cut out all gluten, cut out all dairy. They'll say things like stop doing HIIT workouts and stop running. And I actually tried those things for a long time, and I ended up with some really unhealthy, really unhealthy feelings around food. And I think for me, I realized prescribing this very one-size-fits-all approach around lifestyle and nutrition just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for anyone, and it doesn't make sense for a specific patient population. Everybody's bodies are slightly different. And so what we focus on a lot is not just like what you're eating, but really how you're eating, and how are you structuring your plate? Are you incorporating all the macronutrients? Are you incorporating a lot of fiber? Really focusing on building healthy habits as opposed to cut out gluten for the rest of your life.
Yeah, no, I actually really love that approach. It's kind of like how I work with my clients one-on-one with nutrition coaching, is individualizing things to what they need, as well as never demonizing anything so that you don't have that unhealthy relationship with food. I think, like, with all of the what's the word? Sensationist marketing, where like it's trying to get you to get a triggered
Yeah.
emotion with everything that you do. Things like dairy are really demonized, but with someone with PCOS, having like whole milk can be a little more beneficial than like a skim milk alternative or things like that. And it seems counterintuitive because of that. But how can you, because I'm sure you work with people that have had the idea that whole milk is terrible and I shouldn't be having it ever again. It's ruining everything. How do you kind of flip their perspective on that so that they realize, this is going to be helpful for me?
Yeah.
What's that approach look like?
Yeah. I mean, I guess you can't see on the podcast, but I'm like smiling as you say that, because that actually is one of the most mind-blowing things I ever learned from our dietitian. We have a full-time dietitian who helps, lead a lot of the programming and design a lot of the protocols. And she was explaining to me that, she doesn't understand why dairy is so demonized. What she tells her patients is they should be eating whole-fat dairy, and that some studies actually show it can help your fertility. So she directs you away from low-fat dairy, but whole-fat dairy is totally fine. And I was like, I don't, like, my brain didn't compute. So even personally, I think has been really hard, even for me, to like truly start to break away from some of these things that have been ingrained in me from looking at influencers and, doing, I would say, some not scientific research. I think the way that we have really combated that is two ways. One is, leaning into the research. So if you go on our website, number one, for any article that our dietitian writes or that's around food, it's very highly cited. All of our programming is based in scientific studies. So when she tells you, whole fat dairy is better, she can point to a number of scientific studies that tell you that. If somebody wants to tell you zero dairy is better, I don't think there are really any scientific studies that they can point to. And so that's one way, is just really leaning into, the science and making sure that everything we do is science-based and we can point to that research. And the other thing, again, I think a lot of it comes down to empathy. And so when we screen our providers who are practicing on our platform, one of the biggest things we look for, in addition to, expertise, is empathy. And how do they speak to the patients? And will they take the time to, really explain things in a way that makes sense to a layperson? And so for us, it's about, we have the basis in the science, but then do we also have the empathy and the language around, telling that to you in a way that feels really supportive, and a way that you can understand.
Yeah, no, I love that a lot. I think that's like a missing piece in a lot of different. I think that's a missing piece in bridging the gap between like true objective knowledge, scientific based evidence, and helping the general population understand it, is that degree of empathy and helping them see, like, I understand that maybe you did feel this way, but things have changed a little bit and it doesn't really work that way anymore. And this is the actual perspective and why you should kind of roll with it. And that little extra mindfulness when you're communicating with a person can make all the difference in how they treat themselves and treat the decisions they make going forward. Yeah, no, I love that. Now, going forward, talking more about PCOS in general, you mentioned 1 in 10 women experience PCOS, which is like a really crazy number when you think about it. You're in a crowded room with anybody, there could be a handful of women that probably have PCOS. How would someone be able to know or screen whether they have symptoms that are leading to PCOS or whether they have it at all?
Right. So the crazier statistic, actually, to me, is that half of women with PCOS go undiagnosed. And so actually it's possible that it's really closer to 1 in 5 women and not even 1 in 10 women.
Wow.
The thing about that, though, is actually it's pretty easy to diagnose. You can do that through medical history and blood work. We actually have a diagnostic visit on our platform. So if you were curious about if you have PCOS, you can do a one-time diagnostic visit, and we'll run lab work for you and help you figure that out. But generally, the main symptoms you would look for are, so we diagnose based off meeting 2 of 3 criteria. So one is irregular periods. So are you getting your periods like every 2 months, every 3 months, possibly even, once a year is not uncommon to see in PCOS patients. I'm sorry, your periods are regular is the first thing. The second way we diagnose is through a presence of excess androgens or kind of elevated testosterone versus estrogen. So we can see that both in running your lab work, as well as you can see that in your symptoms. If, for example, you have a lot of acne, or if you have excess facial hair or thinning scalp hair, these are all things that are linked to excess testosterone and can be markers of PCOS. And then the other thing that can be a marker often, as I mentioned earlier, is just kind of rapid weight gain or an inability to lose weight, especially weight around your stomach. That can be tied to the insulin resistance that we see in PCOS.
Can you go in more depth about why specifically weight around your stomach as opposed to other parts of your body?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, PCOS really it's a hormonal issue, and the weight that you're seeing is hormonally driven weight. And, this is why often my heart breaks when I hear about women who have had such bad experiences in the medical system. Because, it feels like it's very much they're being told like, well, it's your fault, you're overweight, or like you should just do something about it. And the truth is it's not their fault. A lot of times it is based in hormones and biology. And also hormonal weight gain tends to be, in the areas that I would say that like make you look more womanly almost. So think about all this being tied back to like testosterone and estrogen. So, women tend to gain more weight around their midsection. So especially when it's hormonal based weight gain, that tends to be more around your midsection. You might see it also like in your arms, for example. That's another place that hormonal weight, you tend to see hormonal weight gain, but you kind of look like more of like that belly fat and less of the fully distributed weight gain because it is hormonally based.
Gotcha. Okay. So now, speaking on hormones, I know, in probably the past couple decades, doctors have been more willing to give and prescribe hormonal birth control to women. And most of them, I should say, use progesterone, which is like excess testosterone in the female body a lot of times. How does that play a role in, influencing or them getting PCOS, and influencing their hormonal health overall?
Yeah. So birth control, I'm really glad you brought this up because this is another hot topic where I think there's a lot of myth busting that needs to happen.
Yeah.
So I hear a lot women say that they don't want to be on hormonal birth control, or you'll hear some maybe more like holistic people talk about like, don't be on birth control, just get off the birth control. And this probably is on the medical community for not explaining this well enough. But the reason that we put women on with PCOS on birth control, number one, is because it helps balance your hormones. So again, you have that testosterone estrogen imbalance. It helps manage that. But just as importantly, if you are not ovulating and menstruating regularly, that means that you are not getting rid of your uterine lining. And so over time, you actually are at significantly increased risk of uterine and endometrial cancer if that lining isn't being shed. And so part of the reason that we're putting you on birth control is to help reduce that risk of ovarian and uterine cancer. So if you aren't menstruating regularly and you're not under any hormones to help manage that, it actually can be dangerous in terms of your risk of uterine cancer down the line. So that is the reason that a lot of times you are prescribed PCOS. Again, I think it's really incumbent on doctors when they are prescribing it to explain better why they're prescribing it. I think it's very clear to me that these conversations aren't being explained well, and people are just like handed a pack of birth control pills and told to go on their way. And that's really an issue as well. So I do think we need more education around it, but that is really why we prescribe birth control a lot, is because of that increased cancer risk. I'm not aware of any linkages between a higher incidence of PCOS and a higher prescription rate of birth control. I'm not aware of that being an issue.
Okay. I can recognize that. It's definitely not a correlation that is found, but more the direction I was going with is, when women are prescribed hormonal birth control, they'll end up getting a lot of the symptoms that lead to PCOS, right? They'll lose their period or start having an irregular period. They'll start having more testosterone dominant traits, like you mentioned earlier. Is that something to worry about when that happens? Because again, it really comes down to the individual and how they feel and which type is going to work for them. But what are some instances where you wouldn't recommend hormonal birth control to a woman with PCOS?
Yeah. Again, I think at the end of the day, like, I'm not a doctor, and really every woman
Right.
should be having this conversation with their doctor about what works best for them. Really the only cases where we wouldn't recommend hormonal birth control are, number one, if you just hate, like if you come to us, to our physicians, and you say, I really don't want to be on hormonal birth control, it hasn't worked for me, we'll say, okay, we'll figure out a way to put you on something that works for you while also reducing all these other risks. Like, we're not going to force you on birth control if you don't feel like it works for your body. That being said, I would encourage you to speak to your physician about trying different types of hormonal birth control and seeing if one works better. Really, the only reason we wouldn't prescribe birth control is if you have history of migraines with aura, or we have other reasons to be worried about, blood clots or stroke. Then we would not prescribe birth control, but otherwise it's really not contraindicated.
Okay. And then if they do experience those negative symptoms after being on birth control, it's kind of like, try something else. How long do you usually give them to give it an honest, fair shot? Because it takes a little bit of time to go through a few cycles and see how you're going to react to it, right?
Yeah. So I guess first of all, the example maybe of like somebody being completely healthy and then being on birth control and then having an irregular period and acne, like you haven't developed PCOS.
Right.
You are having a bad reaction to your birth control. So you can't like get PCOS from your birth control. Just to clarify that. But again, if you are having bad side effects, I would say we generally say like wait a month or two. And then we can try you on a different birth control pill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's understandable. Yeah, no, I didn't want, sorry if that's how it came off and the things are related. I was just saying there's an overlap in symptoms and maybe someone would be worried about seeing that kind of thing. But yeah, no, kind of rolling off of that now. So I really, one of the things you said earlier that I really enjoyed was how you take what, you work in collaboration with the doctors. They help with treating, the symptom of what's happening and minimizing that. But you work collaboratively on improving nutrition and the lifestyle choices to reduce what causes the symptom, right? Going for the root cause of that. What are some things that most women are unknowingly doing that are causing that could be worsening their symptoms without even realizing it?
Yeah. So one common one that we see is actually reducing your carbohydrate intake too drastically. So a lot of women, again, they think, well, it's hard for me to lose weight. Let me like cut out carbs, cut out sugar, cut out all of this. But in reality, like number one, by giving your body good carbs, a lot of times, number one, you're adding in a lot of fiber, and we find that fiber tends to be really helpful for women with PCOS. So if you cut out your carbs completely, a lot of times you're also really deficient in that fiber that you really need. So instead of cutting out, carbs completely, you're probably better off replacing your white bread for whole wheat bread or other sources of more fibrous carbohydrates, things like sweet potatoes. But if you, a lot of women with PCOS really struggle with cravings. So if you just cut out those carbs completely, you're going to have these wild swings where your cravings all of a sudden get really bad. And then you're like, give me all the carbs, and it's all the bad carbs and it's all the sugar. Whereas if you had just like eaten, a sweet potato at lunch or some quinoa at dinner, put a little like whole wheat bread with your breakfast, like you're actually stabilizing your blood sugar much more throughout the day, and you're really avoiding some of those carbohydrate cravings that can hit you and be super intense. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just like not being terrified of carbs and really thinking about carbs that are more nutritious and more fiber dense, and incorporating those in your diet. I think the other thing is really, and this is something I learned that has been super helpful to me, is to really think about, balancing your blood sugar throughout the day, and by like incorporating all your macros. So instead of, just having an apple for a snack, try and think about having an apple with peanut butter, because then you have fat and protein along with those carbs. Like if you just have carbs, you're probably going to be spiking your blood sugar, but if you can incorporate it with protein and fat, that can be really beneficial in maintaining that blood sugar throughout the day. So that's something I personally think through. Actually, it's like every meal I'm like, all right, where's my carb, my protein, and my fat? And how do I think about those all sitting on the same plate?
Nice. So balancing out each individual meal and not eliminating any one macronutrient, kind of managing them instead.
Exactly.
And that kind of goes back to like the mindful eating that you were mentioning earlier, of how you're eating, stopping, slowing down, thinking about your decisions and following through with that.
Exactly. Mindful eating is actually something that is, I think it's valuable for everybody, but I think especially, one thing that does impact PCOS is stress. And so being a little bit more mindful, whether it's in general and trying to meditate more and reduce that stress, or especially while you're eating, having less stress around the food. That's another reason why restrictive diets can really backfire, is you're then putting so much stress around eating that it's like the negative impacts of the stress are just as bad as the gluten was, if not worse.
Yeah. I'm really glad you mentioned stress, because that was going to be my next question, is talking about stress in relation to PCOS. Can you kind of talk about why managing stress in all of its forms would be beneficial, and what harm chronic stress would do to someone on the verge or is suffering from PCOS?
Yeah. So there is some thought that nobody knows exactly what causes PCOS, but there is some thought that PCOS to some degree is linked to excess inflammation, and is also linked to excess cortisol, which is your stress hormone. So, I think that's been like a little bit sensationalized as well. Like people say, well, don't do HIIT because it spikes your cortisol and that's really bad for you. I think that's probably a little too extreme, but there is something to, being constantly in a state of stress does increase your cortisol, and it does increase your inflammation. And so if you can get that stress level down a bit, it can be really helpful in terms of getting that inflammation down. And so, we talk about things with our patients, like, again, try to be more mindful about your eating. Don't be in like a fight or flight mode while you're eating your lunch. Don't do it like at your computer. Try and like, be a little calmer. Like the way you digest your food will be better. Do things like go for walks, do workouts that feel good for you. Those can all be really helpful in reducing stress. But especially with PCOS patients, just because of that insulin and cortisol link, reducing the stress that leads to inflammation and cortisol spikes can be really helpful.
I like that you brought it up like that. There's a topic I've brought up on the podcast a few times called drains and charges. And it's about the idea of, if you do have a stressor in your life, it's not a bad thing. That's a normal part of life. Stress is good in the right amount of dosages. But for every stress, you should match it with some sort of relaxing activity. Like you mentioned, if you do a HIIT workout, cool, you did your HIIT workout. Now go on a light walk or stretch with some deep diaphragmatic breathing, and really bring back your central nervous system to a parasympathetic state and start that recovery process. Because the danger is not balancing that stress and recovery. If I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, right?
Yeah. And I love that, because that to me is so much more valuable of advice than like, don't do a HIIT workout, right? Like what happens if you love HIIT workouts? Like I happen to. So that to me just feels like it actually can be so much more easily incorporated into your life versus telling you not to do things.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because, like you said, I think like your personality plays a big role in this. And if you are a go, go, go kind of person, and someone tells you, hey, just stop, now like you lost your entire identity, you don't know what to do. And
right.
That doesn't actually help anything. It makes more stress in its place.
Right.
So now rolling off of stress, I want to see, because you had briefly mentioned gut issues. How does the role of the gut play with PCOS and going through it?
Yeah. Again, so generally PCOS and women's health in general is really understudied. So I feel terrible, but it's more the scientific community's fault than mine, that a lot of this is going to be caveated with, no one really knows the answer to this. But number one, there are some theories that like gut imbalances, again, can lead to inflammation, which can make PCOS symptoms worse. There also tends to be actually a pretty large overlap between patients with PCOS and patients with IBS or irritable bowel syndrome. Nobody really knows why that is, but we do tend to see a decent amount of overlap. But again, I think this all goes back to like, when you are in tune with your body and your body's performing at its best and digesting your food well, and you're not in a constant state of stress, like you will just kind of be healthier overall. And also these are things when like we're not cutting out food groups and we're not cutting out macronutrients, your gut health tends to be a lot better as well. So nobody totally knows the link, but there is some thought that if you have better gut health, it tends to help both reduce that inflammation, also reduce possibly like IBS that we see in some patients. So that's why, for example, we recommend a lot of patients take a probiotic as well.
Okay. So even though there's no proven direct relation, there is some correlation. And if you do one, it's not going to hurt. If you help your gut health, it's not going to hurt your PCOS. It could actually help, but maybe not directly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. That's actually really good to know. So now you said you've had you're 10 years into your journey right now. What have the last few years looked like for you compared to the first few years? I'm sure there's a lot more clarity, especially like going through all of this, but like personally, if you don't mind sharing, I should say too, what have your more recent experiences been?
I'm gonna be honest. I feel like I've really only gotten more clarity in like the last year.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, I think that will tell you like what a journey it can be. I think for me, you know, to get into my personal journey, a lot of it really has been finding a healthy relationship with food. I've always been pretty petite, and I've been
Hmm.
lucky in that I have, you know, kind of the more atypical type of PCOS that tends to not have the insulin resistance issues as much. But I've kind of still always, you know, because I had this, been terrified about what I'm eating. Am I eating too many carbs? Am I eating too many sugars? And I will say personally, I struggled for many years with some very
Hmm.
unhealthy relationships with food because of that, and because I was
Hmm.
so terrified that like my PCOS meant that if I had one drop of sugar, that all of a sudden I was going to blow up.
Hmm.
And you know, for example, there was a whole year where I was macro counting and I wouldn't eat any apples or bananas because they took up too many macros.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so I mean, some really like just kind
Yeah.
of crazy thinking.
Hmm.
And I would say it was really only in the past couple of years, having been exposed more to thinking around intuitive eating and mindful eating, and being more in tune with, all right, forget what the influencer says, forget what like I Googled online, what does my body tell me that I want right now, and what
Hmm.
am I craving, and learning to trust my body more has actually been massively helpful in terms
Hmm.
of, you know, managing my symptoms, and again, like just really repairing that relationship with food and nutrition and eating much more nutritiously.
Hmm.
And part of that also has been, frankly, my exposure to the dietitians at Alara. And as much as they're talking about the protocols that they're doing for every other patient, I have learned so much
Hmm.
from listening to them, and like, oh wow, that does make so much sense as to why I can eat dairy. Okay, that makes way more sense than what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's taken me many years, um, but I am in a better place in the past couple of years, just having really found that relationship with like, what does my body need, as opposed to constantly trying some new diet trend because I'm terrified of gaining weight.
Hmm. No, I like that you said that. I mean, you called it crazy thinking, but I think even though it's not like ideal thinking, it's definitely a common thought process that a lot of women experience, and like I really appreciate you sharing that. But what has kind of the transition of, okay, I got to try eating healthier again, and trying that banana, but that you were scared of before because you used to take up a lot of your macros. What kind of thoughts and feelings did you have as you tried incorporating it back into your diet more regularly again?
Yeah. So I kid you not, eating a banana was very scary for me the first time I
Hmm.
ate one. That's where I really come back to like, science makes such a difference. Like I was talking with one of the nutritionists, and she said, you know, bananas have a lot of fiber,
Hmm.
and fiber is a really important part of your diet. Oh, and by the way, like all the sugar and carbs in a banana, that's very different than the sugar in like a chocolate bar.
Hmm.
Also, like, you know, don't eat a banana alone. I'm not saying eat a banana alone. I'm saying like,
Right.
when you have oatmeal next time, add it to your oatmeal and add it with some peanut butter, and you'll have a really nice, well-rounded way of like keeping yourself satiated for a few
Hmm.
hours. And so I think like really rooting it in the science around like, you know, here's why fiber is important, and here's why bananas have fiber, and here's why like adding it to protein and fat actually makes for a really well balanced meal that will keep you full for 6 hours instead of, or like 3 hours, whatever it is,
Hmm.
you know, instead of the things you're eating that are keeping you full for 1 or 2 hours. I think like really, again, and that's why so much of what we do is rooted in science. I think it just makes things so much less scary, because you understand the reason behind what you're doing.
Hmm. So you're basically able to talk yourself into being okay with it, even though you were still a little hesitant early on.
Yeah. And then I had a banana again. I was like, wait, bananas are incredible. How did I not eat these for a year?
What have I been doing this entire time?
Exactly.
Man, is there what other parts of your life have you felt kind of the same way with that? You know, you mentioned you were like a big hit junkie. I don't know if if you alluded you still are. Did you feel like you had to give that up for a long time too, and you were relieved to bring it back into your life, or what else happened outside of just nutrition alone?
Yeah. Yeah. Working out is another big one for me. I like love working out. It's a part of like almost my everyday routine. And yeah, I like was told multiple times, even by a functional medicine doctor who was like, stop doing the Peloton, you know, stop doing HIIT workouts. It's not, and I tried it.
Yeah.
for like a week. And I was like, but I don't know, I just really like doing it. And so one, I actually think that was valuable because it really allowed me to see like, what do I like to do and what do I not like to do? And I think that's something I've also tried to focus on more with my workouts, is less like, all right, what's the perfect optimized routine, and more,
Hmm.
what do I enjoy doing? What makes me happy? Like, I'm not an elite athlete to some degree. I'm going to workout classes because they're fun and I enjoy them.
Hmm.
So, what do I like? What do I wake up and want to do that day? So for me, it's been finding actually a mix of more of the HIIT cardio stuff along with more of Pilates based workouts. To me has been really effective, but I just kind of allowed myself the freedom to try a bunch of different workouts and see
Hmm.
what I liked and see what worked for me.
No, I love that a lot. I think like a lot of people get caught up in, they have a goal in mind and they want to do the best version of that thing to get them to that goal. But they forget to think about what am I going to enjoy doing along the way. And you kind of experimenting with that and finding that for yourself is like a really empowering thing for you, I'm sure, to have in your arsenal right now. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, all right, I've tried everything. Like, now I know what I like. Versus I think sometimes it can be like, well, I can't try different things because I have to do this one routine because I want to get X result off of that.
Hmm. No, I love that. That's actually really amazing. I always like to, one of the most common questions I get, through Instagram and just talking to random people is always like, what's the best blank to do? What's the best blank food to eat kind of thing? And, most of it always comes down to context for one, like what's the purpose of this thing that you're trying to accomplish? And then two, what do you like doing? And there's a, there's a really weird old saying of there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat, which is kind of, I don't even know where that came from, but it's true in a lot of aspects. There's a dozens of hundreds of ways to do whatever goal you're trying to accomplish, but which one are you going to enjoy doing? Because at the end of the day, you're spending time of your life doing this. Might as well like have a good time doing it, right?
Right. Well, that was like, how sustainable is it going to be if you're forcing yourself into something that you hate? And I come back to
Mm.
like these restrictive diets. Like, how sustainable are those diets really over time when you're at your 15th birthday party where you can't have any cake? Or how
Yeah.
sustainable is it to be doing a workout that you don't like, are you really going to do that 5 days a week for the rest of your life? Probably not.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I always have a saying of with my clients. They so I do this practice. It's like a rule I have for my clients when they go on vacations in particular. And most of my nutrition coaching is food logging, macro tracking kind of thing. But when you go on a vacation, you're not allowed to log food at all. You're not on vacation to try to lose weight or manage your calories or anything like that. You're on vacation to have a good time, make some nice memories, experience wherever you are. And if you're logging your food, you're gonna be taking away from that. So I have like a very strict rule of you're not allowed to do that for 95% of people. There are some exceptions to that, but because at the end of the day, that's not going to be sustainable for you to always try to log your food. If you're in Japan and you're not in Chicago, like you're going to have a terrible time in Japan. You're not going to remember it for what it could have been because you're focusing on so many other things. So the life aspect gets taken out of it a lot of times. And I like, one of the things uh, that attracted me to kind of like Alara and getting you on the podcast was your holistic approach of how can we make your life enjoyable while at the same time kind of helping you balance everything so that you do feel better, you enjoy your body more. And yeah, I just want to say that. Really, don't have anything else to add to
Yeah.
that. Yeah, no, that's really cool. Okay, so I think we're doing pretty good here. I don't have any other questions right now. Is there anything you want to say though about Alara in particular that we didn't get to mention that you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, no, it was pretty jam packed. We like
Yeah.
moved through topics really quickly. Okay, awesome. Well, Rachel, thank you for coming on. Where can people find more of your work and Alara's work if they're interested to follow up with that?
Yeah, so you can find us at alarahealth.com. That's where you can not only sign up for the full program, but also sign up for our free online community if you wanted to interact and get support from other women with PCOS. We're also super active on Instagram and TikTok. We post a lot of free resources and content there. So you can find us at Alara Health on both of those.
Nice, that's really cool. I love that you said TikTok.
Oh,
Okay, and
we've
that
been blowing up on TikTok.
Really?
Yeah.
I got to check that out, honestly. Maybe I could get some inspiration. And then last question for you. So this is the Not So Stupid podcast. We really focus on simplicity and improving your day-to-day life. So what's one simple thing, or a couple, if you feel like you can't choose, that someone can start doing as soon as they're done listening to this podcast that can dramatically help improve their life?
So a habit that I picked up at the beginning of COVID that I swear has changed my life is going for a daily walk. So every day for at least 30 minutes a day, I walk outside, and even if it's like freezing, if it's horrifically raining, I won't. But for the most part, every single day, I'll go and walk outside for 30 minutes. And it just is a complete game changer for my day, especially when I do it in the morning. Just getting that fresh air just makes me feel so much better and so much more like alive and active. So, and really also has been helpful from, an anxiety and stress component. That walk like really helps with my stress levels. So my biggest advice is it's very simple, but just walk outside at least 30 minutes a day.
Love it. That's actually, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but that's usually the most popular answer is going on a daily walk. People have different reasons for it.
Really popular during COVID because it was like, what else could you do besides go for a walk? And then I realized it was incredible.
Yeah, no, it is a life-changing thing, like you said. And people I think downplay it because it's just walking. I don't want to do that. But it does, the science, on your point, the science has proven so many times all the benefits of it, especially if you go early in the morning kind of thing. But if you do it at all, you're always going to benefit from it. So appreciate you sharing that little tidbit. And yeah, thank you again, Rachel Blank, for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. All of the resources, the Alara Health TikTok, Instagram, and their website is going to be linked in the show notes if you are interested in following up with that. And thank you everyone for listening. We will see you guys on the next episode.